Welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. Our theme for 2025 is the future of work. Meaning is the new money. In a world shaped by rapid innovation and constant change, the pursuit of purpose and impact has never been more important. I'm Dr. John Dentico, your host, bringing over 30 years of experience in leadership, strategic thinking, and purpose-driven innovation. Here, we tackle the pressing challenges of our time, from the rise of artificial intelligence to the growing need for meaning in the workplace. Together, we'll uncover how leaders can ethically integrate AI to enhance decision-making and keep humanity at the heart of their organizations. Remember, amidst all the technological advancements, in the end, it's always about the people. This podcast is your resource for actionable tools, thought-provoking discussions, and inspiring stories. It's time to go beyond leadership development and focus on leadership impact, creating workplaces where people thrive, innovation flourishes, and meaning truly becomes the new currency. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Now, let's throttle up and dive into today's episode. Hello again and welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Dr. John Dentico. With me today is Jamie Flinchbaugh. Jamie is an executive advisor through his firm, J. Flinch. He's worked with over 300 clients over his career, from Amazon to Whirlpool. He founded or co-founded 5 companies, served on the board of directors or advisors for 10. He is the author of People Solve Problems and host of the podcast by the same name. I'm truly pleased to have him here with me today on the podcast. Good morning, Jamie. How are you?
I'm great, John. Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Let's jump right into it if we can get going here. Jamie, talk to me about People Solve Problems. Give me an overview of how you see that in this very tumultuous VUCA world we live in.
I think there's sort of 2 main theses. One, in a VUCA world, you need to do problem solving every day, sometimes micro, sometimes macro, sometimes simple, sometimes hard. And so to me, it's a very human skill. It's something that's just at the center of everyday experience of being a leader, of being a human in an environment like that. And then the other side is that 98% of training, books, communication around problem solving is all about technique. And technique is important. I'm not discarding it, but it's not as important as some of the other elements, such as the behaviors and mindset that you bring to it, the skills that you bring through those techniques. And even if you're leading an organization, the environment you're creating, the structure of the systems, the sponsorship, et cetera. And so I think we focus way too much on some of the wrong elements, and we're missing the things that really make problem solving effective, especially for the hard but everyday stuff.
It's interesting you should say that. People, by their very nature, need what I call an entry point. I am a very process-oriented person. Leadership is about practice to me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so I created a strategic thinking process. I'm a big believer in strategic thinking because you have to give them an entry point. Where do we start? Okay. It's anything else. Where do we start? But I agree. In the end, people have to solve the problem. They have to go after it. I like to say they have to be easy on the people, relentless on the task.
Mm-hmm.
You got to go after it. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about finding the real problem. Okay. I'm a big fan of Henry Mintzberg,
Yes.
who's written, I'm sure, who's written significantly on things like strategic thinking, where he says, look, strategic thinking is not about solving the problem. It's about finding the real problem. What's really going on? So I'm a huge fan of his. And don't get me wrong. I think strategic planning is excellent, but they're two sides of the same coin. They're complementary to one another.
Right.
Jamie, let's talk about that. In your opinion, your perspective, your experience, Talk to me about how organizations can truly find the right problems, if you will.
Yeah, that's essential. And whether it's in just day to day work or in strategic thinking, to me, a lot of strategy is trying to close gaps, and that's by definition a problem statement. So I think one of the most important things is how to frame the problem. So part of it is finding the problem, and part of it is framing the problem. And I think those two go back and forth because as you start to frame it, you find out you might be working on the wrong one. So let's just take the domain of strategic thinking. You might be looking at your market, and I'll take one of the companies, without getting too specific, I'll take one of the companies I co founded. And for quite a while, we were trying to frame and articulate, and then, of course, understand the problem of market penetration. How do we get further into the market when what we really saw was after a while was that we had lots of market penetration and the boundaries of the market were fairly well defined. And so that was the wrong problem. It was a problem that even if we solved it really well, wasn't going to do much to change the fortunes and the direction of the company. And so I don't want to say we retreated, but we re-examined the gap, and we found it really wasn't about that market. It was about reframing the problem around how do we take what we're good at and find a new market. And it's a completely different problem. And I like to think of, I'm an engineer by training, so I like to think in formulas and things like that. So to me, the framing of a problem is like a vector. It sets magnitude and direction. And once you framed it, if we said, oh, that we need to go penetrate the market further, that's our by how much, and we need to double in size, and that's our magnitude. The direction is into the same market. And that sets the nature of all the work that follows. But if we come back and say, no, let's look at a different vector, how do we take what we're good at and find a new market that results in a different value proposition, a different product, but might leverage capabilities and assets? Completely different vector, different thought process, different work, different study, right? But once you set that vector, you lock into it. And I think one of the key roles of the leader is not just to set the frame in the beginning, but also to know when you're following the wrong vector, you need to pull back and re-examine and examine and frame a different problem.
It's interesting because I always, when I talk to organizations, one of the things you brought out, and I just want to go back just for a second, is acknowledging, accepting what the real problem is. Because as you well know, the halls of business are lined with carcasses of organizations that not only didn't want to know what the real problem is, they hoped that the catastrophe would miss them. Well, we'll get by this. No, you may not. I'll give you an example. A few weeks ago, I was working with a company they're a fence building company. They do about 20 million a year, 7 different locations. They called me and they said, "John, look, we need you to come and help us do some strategic thinking. We don't we're there's missing pieces here. We don't understand what those are." I said, "Okay." And so we all met, and when I do strategic thinking, I'm always looking for a cross section, vertical and horizontal cross section, because as you well know, many of the problems get hidden in the recesses of the structure of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
People don't want to tell the boss bad news. Or you have, God bless them, prideful workers who want to solve the problem themselves. I can fix this. I can solve it. Maybe you don't have the horsepower to solve the problem, or you don't have enough juice to get it done. We found the problem. They were paying all kinds of money. They were paying quarterly bonuses. And it turns out that the big problem was that they themselves were not internally organized to optimize the time on site for their subcontractors. So they were wasting a lot of time. And now they're putting a process team together and working on the process. So
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely agree with you. And I always say that if you don't do strategic thinking before you do strategic planning, it's much like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Nobody cares where the drink trolley is if you have a gaping hole in the boat. You got a big problem and you need to pay attention to it. This brings me to my next point because I want to talk about alignment. Okay, we talk about that a lot. Not only I talk about values alignment, people joining the company, attracting, hiring, retaining good people. But I found that if the organization itself is not aligned with its own values, trying to find good people is a hit and miss operation. Because if you don't know what you're about, how do you expect them to join you? So
Mhm.
I'd like to ask you this question, if I could. In your experience through the years that you've done this with all the different companies, how important is it for a succinct, right on the money, as I like to say, mission statement of the organization?
I think the mission statement, to me, it's less about the statement and more about the process of engaging with the statement. And what I mean by that is anybody can write it succinctly, but how do you stress test it against real decisions? How do you stress test it against real organization, real trade-offs, et cetera? And that's where I'll say the rubber meets the road. As an analogy, I think you want that alignment because a team that's aligned and working towards the same goals, working towards the same mission is far more powerful than a really talented team that's not. And a great analogy of this is the all-star team that may play against a regularly formed in-season team. You take a team of not all-stars who have been practicing together, have a game plan, I don't care what the sport is, know how to read each other, know what to expect of each other, and they will almost always beat a team of really talented individuals that lack that alignment. And so, we can see that demonstrated time and time again. So you can get much better team performance, organizational performance when people are aligned. So to me, on the mission statement, it's a combination of, is it right? Right? That's important. Is it a mission statement going back to the strategic thinking that takes us in the right direction? Of course, we have to pick a meaningful direction, but along with that, then people have to believe it. Right? If they're not committed to it, if they don't believe it, their energy isn't in it. I think one of the things I see today and really over the last 4 years as organizations have struggled with resources, getting enough people or whatever that might be, they focus way too much on getting enough people and not enough on getting, I'll say more, not more time, but more energy, more focus, more engagement out of the people they have. And I think there's far more gains in productivity, perhaps less confidence behind it, but more gains in productivity, output, contribution through that work. And some of that becomes that alignment to what are we trying to do? What's our mission statement? And then last is the stress test, right? Is in our decisions and our trade-offs, does it really resonate? Does it really work when we go out into the market, when we have to make a trade-off decision or say no to something? I like to say reality is the arbiter of the truth. And so if we have a mission statement and we find ourselves saying yes to some stuff that's consistent with it, no to stuff that isn't, are those decisions panning out? And if not, then we have to examine, is it our decision or is it the mission statement, and where's the misalignment? So to me, you should always be stress testing that mission statement in real life through, again, decisions, engagements, trade-offs. And it's not about seeing if it's the right mission statement. It's really about what meaning it gives to the organization.
I absolutely 150% agree with you. I think too often organizations see a mission statement as the statement to the outside world. Okay, this is who we are. This is what we do. This is how we intend to do it. And here it is. Love us. Love us. Are we great? And yeah, that's important because it is connected to branding. No question about it. This is who we are on brand. But the most significant part of it to me is, what does it say to the people who work with you? Who's on your team? The point you made about team dynamics and taking a group of good people who've played together is a principle I apply to leadership training. When we train leaders, this is what happens. We take the senior leaders in the organization, we send them to this training over there. We take the middle managers and we send them to this training over there. We take the more junior supervisors, whatever, and we send them to training, another training over here. Why not train them as an intact team? The key is they've got to work together. They got to understand their dynamics, and that's where you get the measures of effectiveness, the MOEs, because they are now functioning as a team. They know they've built, as you said, this intuitive connection, this sense that I know what Jamie's going to do. I know the first 5 questions Jamie's going to ask because we've been doing this for a while, and he knows what I'm going to ask. And we're operating on that level. And that is so beneficial to an organization. So I'm absolutely on board with that idea. I think you have to energize the people that are with you. You got to give them purpose.
Yeah, and I'll double down on your point around training people together. And I'm going to go back in time a bit to my time at Chrysler, which is 30 years ago now. Um, but we, at least in the manufacturing organization, which was 90,000 people, we were trying to go through massive transformation. We were nearly bankrupt. At the end of this transformation, we were the most profitable in the industry. And what we did was cascade training. And with the cascade training, so Denny Pauly, who later on was my co-founder of a consulting firm that I know that I've sold, but Denny was executive VP of manufacturing. He would train his VPs. Then they would turn around and they would train their factory managers and GMs. And those factory managers would train their staffs, all in the same content. And then, but in it was preparation, was discussion, and then also feedback, because it wasn't one round, it was multiple rounds. And yeah, when a VP was doing the training, was it as effective as a professional trainer? No, but it was more powerful because here's my boss delivering the message. And I know not only do they at least demonstrate a commitment to it, who knows what they feel inside, but they've at least demonstrated a commitment to it. But they also had to do the preparation to be ready to train it. And so these are symbolic signals to the organization about the commitment to that. Because as you said, a mission statement that you stick in, you and I are both can say, it used to be in the lobby of the business, right? Now it's on the website, but it's external facing versus no, we're having this discussion. We can communicate and train and deploy anything we want, but people have to believe it, and you need signals to the organization to truly demonstrate that commitment so people do believe that it's real.
Yeah, I shied away for many years talking about mission statements. I got to be honest about it because you know the story, right? You got a mission statement? Oh, yeah, it's up there on the wall. It's up there. You guys live it, you breathe it, you do it every day? No, we walk by it every day. And the answer is no. It's your mantra. It's planting your flag, and forgive the dramatics, but it's the hill you're going to die on here. That's what your organization is about. The kind of funny way I'm talking about it now is talking about the movie 300 with Gerard Butler. And they had a slogan. They didn't necessarily have a mission statement, but their slogan was, "This is Sparta." Does anybody not know who we are? Does anybody want to have a discussion about this, or maybe go with Leonidas to HR? No, this is Sparta. This is what we do. This, and everybody, the farmers included, who are raising cattle, growing the grain that feed the warriors, understand, because they're part of the Spartan culture. They understand that this is Sparta, and everybody's committed to what we do every single day. In many respects, that's the same thing. You got to have people believe, and you've got to walk it and talk it every day. So I'm absolutely on board with that. No question about it. We see eye to eye in that. Let's go to our next subject. Now, it's going to get interesting now, Jamie. All right. Behaviors. Let's talk about behaviors versus actions. I've spent a good portion of the last several years really focusing on this because for me, and I think for others, there's a great deal of confusion between this notion of behaviors versus actions. And I'll tell you what my perspective is, and then I'll ask for your reflection. Okay. If you look up the definition of behaviors, It's defined as an unconscious reflective response. You're walking down the street, and all of a sudden you hear this loud crash, a fender bender happen behind you, and people jump. They just react. It's objective. You didn't plan on it. It just happens. To me, that is really defines a behavior. An action to me is a deliberate, conscious, intended action. Begins with an idea, and then you actually execute it, if you will. So I need you to help me understand how you see behaviors and actions, because I see them as two separate things. I think that, for example, to change a behavior, you have to take a conscious action. You have to do something
Right.
conscious to say, no, I can't do that anymore. I'll use myself as an example. I was a terrible listener, terrible. And I had to slow down, be conscious that I was trying to jump in with words before I listened. I'd love to hear your perspective on the balance, if you will, or the differentiation between behaviors and actions.
Yeah, I think so. I talk about behaviors a lot, and I always have, but in sometimes in different frames. And so I think my framing of it has evolved. But to me, behaviors is where the leverage is, the long-term leverage, the scalability. And to me, I'll take it further, is that your culture is your shared behaviors. Right? So any one person might have a set of behaviors, but when they're shared, that then is your culture. And that's truly can be a competitive advantage or disadvantage depending on what they are. So again, going back to my recovering engineer mindset of seeing the system sometimes as a formula, I do believe that our actions ultimately drive the results, but our actions are any one moment, right? Any one decision, when this happens, I'm going to do this. And they're often very discreet, very conscious, very thoughtful, and very contextual, this moment, right? And this action. But they come from, most cases, our actions in any one moment can come from our behaviors. That's the pattern. That's the unconscious, subconscious behavior that we've driven over a period of time. And I'll give an example of this in a second. But so our behaviors drive our actions in any particular moment. Our behaviors come from our thinking, our beliefs, our mental models, our values. And then our values and our principles, our beliefs come from our experiences, what we've been through in our life, in our work life, in our particular company, whatever that might be. A lot of organizations try to find leverage in the actions. Here's what we want you to do. When a customer complains about this, we're going to offer them a discount or we're going to offer them a replacement. That's an action. That's a policy. That's a step that we might take. But a behavior is we're going to figure out the customer's problem and make it right for them. That may show up in a whole bunch of different ways, but it's leverageable because it has that flexibility within it. As an example, I might ask my kid to go clean their room. That's an action, right? It's a request, it's a step, it's a decision, it's an action. But tidiness or cleanliness is a behavior. And I was in a conference room with a group of people on Monday, and after we all left the room, I personally pushed in 7 chairs. It's just, I was compelled. I was aware of what I was doing, but I know I can't leave this room with disheveled. I'm going to pick up the garbage. I'm going to push the chairs in. That's the cleanliness behavior. So I used to talk a lot more about principles because principles drive behaviors. So by definition, there's more leverage there, but you can't see how people think. You can see how they behave. So to me, behaviors are observable, which A, makes it easier to either reward people or recognize people for good behaviors, hold them accountable for bad ones. They're also easier for us to role model them because people can see us doing them. If I have a belief of curiosity, but it's just back here, right? I sit in my study by myself reading a bunch of stuff. That's different than I ask curious questions, which is an observable behavior. And then as leaders, right, if we follow that formula, we need to pay attention to the experiences we're giving people to shape their beliefs and their behaviors, including the role modeling, including the questions we ask, including the actions and decisions. And so, again, if I want curiosity through asking open ended questions as a behavior, some of it just begins with me role modeling it, which is an experience that everybody else has. So, I talk a lot about behaviors. I think we have to articulate them in observable ways. I think we need to role model them. I think we have to select them carefully and thoughtfully. And then, as leaders, we need to do everything we can to signal our commitment, the importance, and the demonstration of those behaviors.
It's interesting. I'm going to latch onto a particular word you said, and that is experiences. So if you look at problem solving as an experience, Jamie and John are involved in this company, let's say, and we're solving problems. We're finding the real problems, and there are other people here with us, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And our experiences, they're sharing the problem solving experiences that maybe you and I are working on, and say, hey, here's the pathway to this. This looks like we can solve it. We can close, as you say, close the gap. I love that word. I use the gaps all the time. I think the experiences then, come back when you're ready, the experiences then feed or alter our behaviors. Would you say that's correct?
Oh, 100%. And I'll use problem solving as an example at the leadership level. Problem solving should be a rigorous and open ended learning process. It's an act of discovery, right? We don't already know the answer, almost by definition. Otherwise, it's just troubleshooting, right? If my gas gauge says E, I go put more fuel in the car. That's just troubleshooting. I know the solution already. I just need to match it. But problem solving is I don't know the answer. I have to discover it. And so what happens as an experience that people have with their leaders is a leader will go inward and they will think in their head. They may think rigorously, but in their head, they're thinking through the problem and then they tell everybody the solution that they've decided upon.
Right.
And what happens is what people experience is the leader jumped to a solution. They either knew the solution or they jumped to a solution or they got there very fast because they didn't see the rigor. They didn't see the discovery. And I get that sometimes we can't demonstrate that discovery live, right? If I'm working on a major organizational shift, I can't like, hey, I'm going to be thinking about this over the next year and a half, right? That just sets turmoil for the organization. But after the fact, it's okay, here's the org change I'm now announcing, but here's the 18 months of work I did to build up to it. We can, even if it's after the fact, we can give people the experience of seeing it as a open-ended, rigorous, thoughtful act of discovery and learning. But that's not usually what leaders do. What they usually do is declare the solution as if it was just born out of genius. And it's not intentional. It's just how it comes across.
Right.
And then everybody else thinks, oh, leadership is being intuitive and genius in the moment, jumping to solutions quickly. It's not slowing down, being rigorous and thoughtful. And so then they try to do the same thing because they're following what they observe as opposed to what may or may not be what we really want.
Another kind of way I'm trying to illustrate this to people when I talk about leadership and the sort of the collaborative leadership perspective that I have worked on. And I tell people, look, my leadership model that I started developing 30 years ago is built on one premise, and that premise is contribution. We have an issue, we have a problem. Who wants to help? Who has an idea? You never know where a good idea is going to come from. So the way I'm expressing it to get people to at least get their arms around the basis is, in the last 60 or 70 years, we have raised leaders as though they were a legion of Jedi Knights. The Jedi Knight's going to come along, brandish the light sword, and solve, just as you just pointed out, solve the issue almost instantaneously right before your very eyes, not understanding what they had to go through to become a Jedi Knight.
Mhm.
And what I tell people nowadays is in the 21st century leadership world we live in today, certainly in the wake of the COVID pandemic, leaders have to see themselves more as Yoda. They have to see themselves as raising a generation of Jedi Knights who are going to do the work,
Mhm.
who are lit up by the mission statement, by our values, by where we're going with this. And once you see that, all of a sudden, just like you say, a lot of the things that seem instantaneous go by the wayside. And now you're inviting people to be part of the decision making processes of the organization, which is extremely powerful for people. I'd love to get your reflection on that.
Yeah, and I'll connect it back to something we began with, which is in a VUCA world, we need to make more decisions faster.
Right.
It's just the reality of what we face. And you can't do that as an individual. The only way we can make more decisions faster is to make them more poorly as an individual. We can't just expand our capacity to do so naturally. To do that, one of the most powerful levers is to get more people able to make decisions, involved in making decisions, push decisions closer to the point of activity, whether that's the customer, the front line, the supplier, whatever that might be. And so fundamentally, if I want to be able to be resilient and dynamic in a VUCA world, I need more people capable of making decisions without needing to escalate them to a decision making body at an executive leadership level. And so then my job as a leader is to build decision making both through process and through people. So the people is, do we have the skill sets, the capabilities, the beliefs, the connection to the mission, whatever those things might be. The process is, what are the heuristics or the rules of thumb to make decisions? Who do we want to include in decisions? When do we consult others? When do we just own it? Who actually owns the decision rights? What do you include in decision making? When do you move fast? When do you move slow? And making sure the organization has the tools for the right process for that as well. And to me, some of the leaders that I worked with directly that I respect the most make very few decisions. And even with their own team, they will demonstrate that, okay, I will have a differing view from you on this decision. I will hold you accountable for the collective nature of all your decision outcomes. But if I disagree with you, I'll tell you and then you'll own it. And that's fine. I'm not going to overrule you, but you'll own it. And then over these series of decisions, you'll either perform or you won't. And I'll support you in that. And you'll either prove yourself or you won't. But in the reflective moment where I disagree with you, I'm not going to overrule you because I need you to own those decisions.
Many times, the people who you may consider to be somewhat junior in the organization may have access to greater knowledge and information than the people at the top. So you have to invite that in because that feeds the process of decision making. Did you know about this? No, I didn't know about that. Yeah, that's happening. That's a trend in the business world right now that we're seeing. For example, I'm just making that up. But the point is, there's so much going on in making quality decisions every day, working with quality on solving the problems, that to do it alone is crushing to that individual. You'll burn that person right out. After how long can you keep this up if you're carrying it all by yourself? So to distribute that decision making capacity, and as you said before, learning your way to the answer. So you may not know what the answer is. You have to learn your way to the power, if you will, of the learning organization. We have to learn our way to the answer. We don't know what the answer is, but
Right.
we're going to find it. We're going to find it. We're going to work together and get there. And I think that's so very powerful. Jamie, we're getting close to the end. I could go on and on with you for, I'm sure, 2 hours at least. But I want to ask you my favorite question, and that is the magic wand question. And that is, if you had a magic wand and you could wave it at any issue or problem in the world in which you live and work, what would that problem be, and why did you choose that?
I think if I had that ability, it would be to essentially force people out of their comfort zone in a way that resets a learning mindset. and be able to do that perpetually, almost every morning. We wake up with a learner's mindset because whether it's a VUCA world or it's better problem solving or it's tough decisions, they require that learner's mindset at the core. And so often we think, hey, I have 30 years experience. I know what I'm doing. And that's where failures, I think, begin. Yes, we rely on that experience. We rely on all that wisdom and insight and knowledge that we've gained over the years. But for each new decision, for each new problem, we approach it with a learner's mindset, with curiosity, with the willingness to be wrong, with humility. I just think we get a much higher probability of good outcomes from those decisions, the problem solving, the actions that we take as leaders.
Yeah, I agree. And there has to be this invitation, if you will, for people to join in on the decision making processes. The number two, the big one that I've read and searched, is that in the world today that we live in today, there's three wants of the multi generational workforce. Number one, they want to have alignment of values. Number two is they want to be involved in the decision making processes. They want their work to matter. Everyone, you, me, we all search for a level of control and autonomy over our own destinies. And third is they want training and learning
Mm-hmm.
that advances their professional career. And I think that those are the baselines to me. That's the basement. Okay, if you focus on the basement first in your marketing efforts to bring people in and to keep people in your organization, I think it's very powerful. And if you're not doing it, as I like to say, you're missing a bet. In any case, Jamie, thank you so very much for being here with me today. I truly appreciate it. And I want to wish you continued success, good health in everything that you do. I appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed the dialogue.
Thank you.